I'm the Audio for Kit Guru. ASUS ROG Maximus XII Hero Wi-Fi is a fully featured motherboard with LGA 1200 for the latest 10th gen Intel Comet Lake S processors. It's got a ton of features. The price is just over £400. It's all about the motherboard. The board itself is a solid slab of engineering. The package consists of a handful of cables, Wi-Fi antenna, and this curious little fan that we'll come to shortly. The board is what I think of as ROG-y, so smart understated styling, endless headers and connectors, micro buttons. This curious micro button here, so we've got the start button and this is called flex key. By default, it is set as a reset button, just as you'd expect. The manual tells me I can reset it in the BIOS, for example, to control RGB. I can find no option in the BIOS to reconfigure flex key, and ASUS hasn't returned my email asking me about that. So although it's labeled flex key, I'm considering that to be start and that to be reset. The M.2s are under these shields here. Slightly annoying to gain access. You have to remove this cover, as you will see, and then these two covers to gain access to the top two M.2s or the lower M.2. That M.2 will disable two SATA ports, which is no problem. You've got 6 SATAs on the side next to the USB 3, nicely laid down. Only, in inverted commas, having 4 SATAs, no problem whatsoever. This curious little fan. I criticised the MSI Meg Z490 Ace for having a fan in the I/O shield to cool the VRMs. This attaches to this ATX screw here and then connects to a regular fan header, and the idea is it adds airflow to your VRMs. No, just not necessary, and kind of nice to have just as an extra, but not necessary. It's worth noting the VRM heatsink is not the usual L shape, it is a C shape. It extends around above the graphics slot. Let's just take off this armour. PCI Express support with Z490 is the same as Z390, so we have 2 graphics slots. It's worth mentioning these support both SLI and Crossfire. You'll find many Z490 boards that have dual slots but do not support SLI. And we have 3 M.2s for loads of storage. There we have a heatsink on the chipset. Moving up the board, the 4 memory slots support up to 128 gigabytes of DDR4 4700. I can't see us testing that in a hurry. And then we have the VRMs. And off with the heatsink. Great big slabs of metal, however it does have a decent amount of surface area, and we have a flat heat pipe connecting the 3 together. Here we have the main power delivery. These components would usually go in this location here. ASUS has seen fit to move them away from the memory. The VRM controller is the ASUS logoed ASP14051, which we believe is an IR35201. That is an 8-phase VRM controller, so the 16 phases here are actually more like a 7+1, except they're 14+2. The stages are by Infineon. They're rated at 60 amps apiece, so we're talking a hefty amount of power delivery for the CPU. On the I/O, we have a good selection of ports and connectors, including, slightly surprisingly, HDMI. Bearing in mind most Intel CPUs are actually APUs. We've got regular USB 2, we've got USB 3, we've got USB 3.1 in my book, or 3.2 Gen 2 if you must. We've got Type-C. We have a pair of Ethernet. The Ethernet, one is Intel Gigabit, one is Marvel 5 Gigabit. Wi-Fi is Wi-Fi 6 or AX. That's the breakdown. Now let's see the board in action. To test the ASUS Maximus XII Hero, we're using an Intel Core i9-10900K. CPU cooler is a Fractal Design Celsius S36. with 3 Noctua Chromax NF F12 fans running at full speed. RAM is 32 gigabytes Corsair Vengeance LPX 3600. The graphics card is a Gigabyte RTX 2080 Super. We have a 1 terabyte WD Blue SSD, and the power supply is 1300 watts of Seasonic Prime Platinum. I am confident you have never seen a BIOS screen like this. The important thing here is F1 will enable the Intel default power settings, F3 will unlock them and will give you the standard Taiwanese experience. I'm going to go with F1 And now we're in the BIOS, and I'll go into Extreme Tweaker and enable XMP. And I'll also ramp up the fan speeds, save. And now we can check our homework with the Shimano tool, and we see 125 watts, 250 watts, 245 amps, tau's correct, everything is absolutely happy. We are on default Intel settings. And the consequence is when we run Cinebench R20, all the cores whack up to 4.9 gigahertz. Fans are ramping up. Power at the wall socket 300 watts plus 302, 303. Speed is now dropped to 4.2 gigahertz, power draw down to 200 watts. Just before the end of Cinebench R20. We can see this better if we go into Blender. Power at the wall socket 305 watts, and we're looking at 4.8 gigahertz all cores. There we go, 200 watts already, and now the speed is 4.1 gigahertz. And that is Intel power management at work. Let's just see what the CPU temperature is doing. So CPU package 50, and all the cores amazingly tight, the spread of temps within the new 10th gen processors. 48, 50, 49, 48. CPU package power 125 watts, which is exactly what it should be. And if we go down here we go, in the ASUS ROG Maximus section of HW Info, CPU V-Core 103 volts, so 1 volt. And there we go, that is 10 cores chugging along nice and sedately, nice and cool, 4.1 gigahertz, all cores. And finally, it limps to a conclusion. We return to the BIOS, go round to the I/O panel and clear CMOS, kills the system. Start it up, do the Del key dance, and now we can use F3 to unlock all limits, reset XMP, and we definitely want the fans on. And now when we use the Shimano tool, we can see the power limits have been raised. 4095 watts is essentially infinite. This CPU is going to get all the juice it requires. You will recall that Cinebench R20 ran the processor at full speed until the very end of the test. So let's just run that. Expect the power to go up to 300 again. Okay, just as before. Clock speed 4.9 all cores. And we're looking to see whether the clock speed is maintained all the way through the test and whether or not the power dips from 300 to 200. It was right at the end of the test. Running like a train. And now Blender. Same deal again, so all cores 4.9, previously it had already clocked back. Sitting there looking good. 330 watts at the wall socket. CPU package 69 degrees, CPU power 233 watts, 235, so not 250, certainly not 125. And V-Core 1.20 really, 1.225 it was, now 1.217, 1.23, call it 1.22. CPU package 72, 73, the cores vary from 68 through to 71, 67 there. Nice tight spread of temperatures. And the test comes to an end, proving that faster clock speeds will save you, in this case, about a minute. It comes as no surprise that limiting power and slowing processor speed hurts Blender times, but then Blender scales amazingly well. But glance back at those Cinebench figures and you'll see the limited processor actually performs slightly better. In the real world it's identical, and that's because the power limit kicks in at the very end of the test, so effectively the processor is running at full speed throughout. Just so we're clear, the figures I've shown on the screen there are not the official benchmarks, they're just a snapshot. As you can see, I'm running OBS to do string grabs and such like in the studio. The figures I'm using for benchmarks are these. Recently, Bob Swan of Intel came up with a controversial statement about benchmarks. Roll it, Bob.
Hello, and welcome to Virtual Computex. The COVID-19 pandemic is reshaping business and personal priorities. We should see this moment as an opportunity to shift our focus as an industry from benchmarks to the benefits and impacts of the technology that we create.
It's crystal clear that Intel's being slightly disingenuous when they say to ignore benchmarks, but the evidence of our eyes tells us that, depending on what you're doing with your Core i9-10900K, it's perfectly possible to get a really good experience using much less power. Nonetheless, it seems very strange to me to install a 10-core processor that can run at 4.9 GHz on all cores and instead to run it at 4.2 GHz on all cores. That's a bit of an aside to this review, so it's time to get back to the ASUS ROG Maximus XII Hero. Within the BIOS, we have a lot to get to grips with. Let's dip first into easy mode just to take a quick glance at that. We've got all the features that we require apart from incorrect time. We have CPU temperature, vCore, motherboard temperature, which is pretty much irrelevant as we're on Open Test Bench, single bootable device, a whole bunch of fans, and over here we have the AI feature, which I'm in two minds about. Go to advanced mode and we can see the details of the AI prediction, which boils down to how good is the processor and how good is the cooler. The cooler, as you are aware, is a Fractal Design Celsius S36, so pretty blooming good. And the motherboard has had a good chance to get to grips with this particular processor, and yet we're talking here about 1.566 and 1.60 vCore, which is just the sort of number you don't want to see anywhere. And then load line calibration 4. Essentially those numbers there I'm not going to touch because they terrify me. Within my favorites you'll find some of the key parameters, so for example CPU core ratio, which at the moment is set to auto as you saw a few minutes ago, and sync by all cores is the typical way that you overclock. However, AR optimized is going to engage this gubbins down here, sync by all cores. DRAM has been set by XMP, that's fine. We're currently on auto vCore. Let's change that to 1.35, so manual mode. Into Extreme Tweaker, ASUS MCE, disabled enforce all limits, enabled remove all limits, we'll go for that. Going to go for 5.1 gigahertz. Load line calibration. Now we do, in fairness to ASUS, have some decent explanatory notes. Level 1 is greater V-droop, level 8 is minimum. They're recommending level 4, which is relatively mild, you might think. We found that level 5 actually works slightly better with this board, i.e. holding up a tad more than the recommended. At the moment, the cache frequency or ring bus is set to 4.3 gigahertz. Let's raise the ring bus to 4.7. Save that lot. And we quickly dive into Cinebench R20. Power at the wall socket is now 340 watts. 5.1 all core. $234 watts on the CPU package. And a healthy score. When it comes to the benchmarks, the ASUS ROG Maximus XII Hero does well. The processor is overclocked at 5.1 GHz, and that delivers the goods just as you'd expect. The surprise here is that the ASUS is able to compete with the MSI MEG Z490 Ace, which is running at 5.2 GHz. The extra 100 MHz helps the MSI on occasion. The ASUS shines particularly well in power draw. The power draw is impressively low and significantly lower than the MSI. Also, the VRM temperatures are low. There was absolutely no need for the active fan included in the package. Those VRMs are just icy cool. The ROG Maximus XII Hero is expensive. It costs £430, and given that I criticised the MSI MEG Z490 Ace for costing £390, clearly 10% more, I have to criticise the ASUS as well. It's also obvious that is the new normal for Intel desktop. If you want a decent performing board that can support the 10-core Core i9-10900K, God, I hate that name, then you need a proper board to support it. If you want an i5 or some such, clearly this is overkill. That should be obvious. So if you're looking for the 10 core in particular, possibly the 8 core, but the 10 core, you need to spend around £400 for your motherboard. In that context, $390 for the MSI, $430 for the ASUS. 40 quid is significant, but you know, you're not going to make your decision based on that alone, I hope. The board itself is impressive. You get very little in the way of accessories. You get some cables, SATA, RGB extension and so on. You get your antenna for the Wi-Fi naturally. You get this, well, it's actually quite comical, little fan to cool your VRM coolers. Totally unnecessary. ASUS has done a good job with the engineering, so the VRMs, yup, the VRM cooler, that works well. The result is happy, happy, happy. Layout of the board is pretty much good. The M.2 cover is slightly annoying, not the end of the world, but that's not great. The look of it, I like it. The micro buttons, all good. Why I cannot program the flex key continues to baffle me. We'll put that to one side. The way the headers and connectors are laid down for the USB 3 and the SATA, that's good. Headers and connectors across the foot of the board, all good. Happy. Criticisms next to none. Slightly mystified by the fact we have the HDMI on the I/O panel, because I can't really see anyone connecting directly to the board to use the graphics that's in the processor. But I suppose if you're troubleshooting it might come in handy, but it seems unnecessary. Anyway, so the board itself, good. The bias leans towards the complicated end of the scale, but that seems to have been a feature with ASUS now for the past year or two. There's so much stuff in them, finding the bits that you want and ignoring all the rest of it. It really does get to be a bit of a trial. The AI feature, as I showed you in the BIOS, wants you to pump in 1.55 or whatever V-core. I mean, what's that about? No thanks. So the BIOS could do with being leaned down, I think. I was not hugely impressed by only achieving a 5.1 gigahertz overclock on this board. Having said that, at 5.1 gigahertz, it ran nicely. I feel the board could take that processor faster. I'm not sure it'd necessarily be a good idea, but I'm sure the board can do it. It's going to come down to BIOS settings. Of that, I am quite sure. Having said that, at 5.1 gigahertz, it was running really cool. Processor temperature was fine. VRM temperatures really impressive. Power draw low. That's all good. I continue to be slightly mystified by this ASUS emphasis on running at Intel reference power settings. That's such an un-ASUS sort of thing, but hey-ho, there we go. I mean, there's no harm in it. It just seems curious on a board that clearly is designed for overclocking, and then they say, yeah, set it to 125 watts. It's like, okay, if you say so. Or no, let's just go faster. So that's just a bit of a mystery. So the board, good. The hardware, good. The accessories, almost non-existent, but that's fine. Price, It's a bit uncomfortable. The BIOS is fully featured and perhaps too fully featured, but there's not a lot about this board I'd change apart from access to the M.2 drives. Overall, I'm impressed. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the bell button, subscribe, head over to kitguru.net to read our news and reviews. I'm the auditor for KitGuru. This is the ASUS ROG Maximus XII Hero Wi-Fi.